Well, good morning. It's good to be with you guys. Welcome to the second service, first live stream of a Grace Church for the new year. It's good to have you guys. Hopefully you had a great new year, good Christmas. We are getting ready to look at a lot of things this year and excited about where God is taking us, specifically along the lines of what it means to be a church that not only knows the good news of Jesus, lives that out, but also gives that away to other people. And so if you're new with us and you are a follower of Jesus, that's kind of our hope for you, that you would know that good news, live it out, and share it with others. If you're not a follower of Jesus, we say all the time that you don't have to be a follower of Jesus to come here. We're just glad that you would involve us in that process. And so if you're asking questions, our hope for you is that maybe you get some answers, not only from like us, but maybe God this morning. Maybe he speaks to you. Maybe you don't get all your questions answered and you just leave with a community of people to kind of ask questions with. That would be a win for us as well. We are starting off the new year talking about this morning God's faithfulness. Thought it'd be a great place to start. And that's tricky sometimes because maybe depending on the year that you've had, honestly, depending on the week that you have, and maybe the family that you have over Christmas, you might go, God's faithful, I think, right? Maybe that might be where you're standing. It could be that faithfulness or God's faithfulness is not the word that immediately comes to mind. In fact, it wasn't the word that came to my mind when I thought about last year or the year before that. And honestly, when I'm thinking about this coming year, the word that I thought of is actually an acronym. It's this word. It's VUCA. Has anyone heard this? You can throw up a hand if you have. I'm not going to call on you. Has anyone heard this term? VUCA? No? Okay. VUCA is a term used sometimes by the military, sometimes by high-capacity organizations or leaders to describe literally the past 2 years. So you know what VUCA is, even if you don't know what VUCA is. It stands for 4 words. The first one starts with a V, surprise, and it is volatility. Okay, we're talking about something that's volatile. Think like an exploding volcano in lava, okay? You're like, exactly, my life, that, right? 2, uncertainty. U stands for uncertainty. Don't know where it's going, don't know where it's been. I don't have a lot of answers. Got a lot of questions. Okay, that would be the U. C stands for complexity. So a lot of information, a lot of data, maybe a lot of things attached. You know, you pull one thing and it pulls on something else. You're trying to solve this problem. It's just very complex. And the last one is ambiguity. And so even though things are complex and there's a lot of data, and even though things are uncertain and volatile, it's just really ambiguous on really what we should be doing, right? My wife and I have a word actually for VUCA. It's not VUCA. It's called bedtime with kids. That's what this is. There's a lot of volatility, a lot of uncertainty, not sure if they're going to get to bed, complexity and ambiguity, right? Try to be as clear as we can with that. Maybe you have a word for VUCA. Maybe it's your finances, right? Maybe you're starting off the school year in this next semester going, how am I going to, it's very uncertain, it's very volatile, very ambiguous and complex. Maybe for you, it's your relationships. You're like, that's kind of looking at 2022. It's that, for you, maybe it's, you know, your bank account. Maybe you're going to take a look at the state of this world or politics or friendship or like whatever, your career, and you're going, that is that. Like, I didn't have a word for it, but apparently someone else did. And what's fascinating about VUCA is this. Everyone who studies it tells you this, that you cannot lead your way out of it. All the leadership that you could find in the world can't lead out of VUCA. You also can't buy your way out of it. You just can't spend your way out of it. You can't plan your way out of it, and you can't prepare for it. And that's what makes it what it is. And here's what everyone kind of says. They all say this. You just kind of have to learn to live with it. Now you're like, I could have told you that, right? That's what I've been doing for the last 2 years. I've learned to live with it. And I think here's where this kind of fits with what we're looking at for this year. When we talk about God's faithfulness, I think there's something inside of us, even if you're a follower of Jesus, where you go, yeah, I know God is faithful, but I think when it comes to 2022, I'm fairly certain that whatever it is, I'm just going to have to learn to live with it. I have to learn to live with it. And so here's kind of the question that I want to wrestle with today. For people who might say, and maybe you don't say this, it's okay, but if you're a follower of Jesus and you say God is faithful, what does that have to do with learning to live in uncertain, volatile, ambiguous, and complex times? And I know that was out of order, okay? All right, how do we solve that? Well, to take a look at that, we're going to take a look at a passage of Scripture, actually a whole chapter. We're going to walk through a story that maybe you heard if you grew up in Sunday school or in the church. It's in Daniel chapter 1. So if you have Bibles, you can turn there. If you don't, it'll be on the screen for you. Daniel chapter 1, and in it, just some background. We're going to take a look at a group of young guys, 14 to 15 years old. These guys would have been the survivors of a battle that decimated their homeland. They lived in the province of Judah, which would have been southern Israel. That's the country. And they would have just seen their people that they love, care about, their worlds, their plans, all just fall apart, gone kaput. Because Babylon, a giant empire, came in, wiped out all their loved ones, and what's more than that, in the midst of that, picked them up and took them back captive to live in a foreign land. And that's what we're going to pick up. And we're going to learn, I think, 3 things that God's faithfulness can teach us about uncertain times. You talk about uncertainty and complex and ambiguous and volatile. It was their life. It was their new normal. Here's where our story starts off. Chapter 1, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years. At the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. Talk about living in uncertainty. What does God's faithfulness have to teach us? I think the first thing is this, that we need to learn to live with distinction. What is happening in what we just read? You say, well, their country just got obliterated and they got taken captive. Well, yeah. But notice, he didn't just take people captive. He said, who's the best and the brightest, and who are the elite? This would be like the ruling class and like the like scene, those people. Like whoever's in the entourage, we got something, we're going to come in and take them away. He brings them to their new country. And what do they do? He begins, the king, Nebuchadnezzar, begins a cultural indoctrination process. He's like, I've got an all-expense-paid scholarship to the school of Babylon. You're going to learn new language. Right? We're going to give you different things in a way to make you look like us. That was his job. That's what the purpose of this was. And so if you look at the text, you see, he gave them a daily portion of the food. You're going to eat the same things that we eat. You're going to be educated. You're going to learn the same things that we learn. And the chief eunuch who's in charge of them gave them a new name, right? So new culture, new gods, new ideas. And by the way, we're going to give you a new identity. Don't miss this, right? Your old identity, it's dead. Here's how you are now. And so these are not just names, these are names that meant something. And so if you take a look at the first name, Hananiah, meant God is gracious. That's a great name for a Hebrew person, but not for a Babylonian. And so no longer is God gracious. Hananiah, we want you to forget that. Here's who you are now. You're command of the moon god. Isn't that great? Get that tattooed on you, right? Command of the moon god. Don't really. I don't know. Maybe you can, right? That's what he is now. Forget God is gracious. Command of the moon god. That's who you are. By the way, Mishael, who is like God? Now, that would have been a question that Israel would have known. In the book of Isaiah, God asked that question. He says, who's like me? And it's almost like, who's like me? Like, who? Nobody. That's right. Nobody's like me. Because I'm the God of Israel. That's what his name meant. And the Babylonians are like, we can't have that. So they name him, who is like Aku. And you're like, who is Aku? Right? Didn't know. If you don't know, which historians tell us, that this is Nebuchadnezzar's favorite god. Okay? So he's like, forget who is like your God. Who is like my God? That's your name now. Okay? I don't want to be named that. Doesn't matter. That's your name. Right? That's your. And then lastly, Azariah means Yahweh. That's the personal name of the God of Israel. Yahweh is my help. Well, certainly we cannot have a guy living in Babylon with the name Yahweh is my help. That causes some problems. So we're going to name him servant of Nebu. Nebo, right? Again, Nebo, Babylonian god, right? So they've changed their name. They've changed their identity. They're feeding them food. They're making them disciples of literally the king. They're going to eat the king's food. They're going to learn the king's language. They're going to be like the king so that they might stand before the king, and the king will say, you're either like me or you're not like me. Pass or fail. That's what's going on. Now, why is this happening? Why are they like literally making them drink the Kool-Aid here? Well, because Nebuchadnezzar knows that it's easier to conform someone than to conquer them. I mean, he's good at conquering. He just did that. But listen, if he walked up to the people that were left and said, hey, you guys, we know that you're like descendants of the king. We know that you're royalty. We know that you're elite. You just leave Yahweh and join us. They'd be like, no, we'd rather die. And then you just have to kill them all because that's what he would do. Rather, he's like, no. I'm gonna ease you into it. I'm going to make you like us. I'm going to let you lose your distinctiveness and become like the rest of the people and the culture, and eventually you'll forget. It's a little bit like trying to move a lion. Imagine that I came to you and I said, there's a lion in my backyard and I need you to come take care of it. You'd probably go like, no, right? But say I made you. Say I said, no, there's nobody else. You have to move this lion. Like, I've tried everything. How would you move a lion, right? You don't, I would expect that you would not walk to my backyard and go, here, kitty, 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 kitty. Not going to happen, right? My sister has cats, unfortunately, but she has them. And if you shake their food and their treat bag, the cat comes running. Again, probably don't want to do that with a lion, right? You're not going to like wave your arm or some like meat in front of it and go, come on. Like, you're not going to want to do that because it might make the distinction between, how do we move lions? You know how we move lions? With a tranquilizer. We go, and the lion goes, and then he wakes up somewhere else. Like, what happened? What in the world? What's around my neck? You know, like all this stuff, right? That's what we do. Listen, that's the same thing with the enemy when it comes to you and me. The enemy has found, listen, it is easier to conquer us with pleasure than with persecution. Look, persecute me, I'll fight you. I'm going down with the ship. But man, you feed me and give me a nice show to watch, what do you want me to do? Right? Listen, here's what I know as a pastor, and here's what I think about as a dad. I think about this, that it is far easier to forget God than to deny him. Far easier. You know what I'm concerned about in 2022 when it comes to followers of Jesus? It's not that suddenly you'd wake up one morning and half of our church would just go, oh, we're not going to follow God today. Do you know what I'm concerned with? I'm concerned that we would forget him. That the call of this world and the language of this world and the things that it names us might become our primary identity and consumption rather than Christ. that we would pursue that. That's why Paul, writing to the Romans, he says this, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Look at this. Don't be conformed to this world. Don't do it. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. But be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. This verse is what's going on here. Daniel has the difficulty, and his friends, of fighting being conformed to the culture and maintaining distinctiveness. That's the question of the passage. You may have just quickly read over it and not noticed it, but in the beginning of chapter 1, the part that we read, verse 2, talks about the fact that the king brought these vessels of the house of God. These would have been objects of worship. So we have things like this that I put stuff on. There's a microphone here, that piano, which is really a keyboard, right? By the way, these are things that we use on Sunday to help us facilitate worship to God. The things that they used back then would have been made of gold. They would have been symbolic. They would have been more ornate. They would have actually been dedicated for the purpose of worshiping God, so that as people use them, they might point themselves and point other people toward the glory of God. That's what they did. So here's what the king did. The king took that object of worship and he brought it into his own God's temple, and he put it there and said, now that thing that was meant to bring direct glory to the God of Israel, now guess who it brings glory to? My God. That's how I'm going to use it. Don't miss the fact that he then takes the people of God and tries to do the same thing. You see that? That's what Paul's talking about. When he's saying presenting our bodies, he's saying you and I, we are vessels to bring glory to God. That's why we exist. And the danger is that we might be pulled out and brought into the worship and the glory of something other than God that our culture might bring us and lead us to. So it begs the question, what is my distinction? What is it in my life that sets me apart as a follower of God? Now, because we're in the South, let me just give you two cautions in answering this question. Number one, don't just say Jesus. And it's not because I don't think you need more than Jesus, but it's because I really want you to think about that. Because in the South, we are famous for taking Jesus and just slapping him on something, right? Jesus jeans, there you go, right? Jesus bumper sticker. Hey, you want to get some people who are followers of Jesus to buy your stuff? Get a fish, put it on whatever you're doing, right? Landscaping, right? There you go. We take Jesus and we put him on everything. We put him on our sports team. We put him on our politics. We put him on our iced tea. We put him everywhere. We got it. You want to see Jesus junk, right? Just go to any Christian store. You can buy mints with crosses on them and things that hang from your dashboard and all this stuff. I mean, your rearview mirror, that's what I meant. But everywhere. All that stuff. We got it all. We got shirts. But listen, we need people who don't put Jesus on our life. We need people who have placed our lives into his. Who the distinction is not simply the name Jesus, but the life and the motivation and the heart and the mind of Christ. Second caution, don't just simply say, I'm going to be a good person. I mean, I'd like you to be a good person, but listen, in the South, good people is kind of what we do, right? We put that forward. You smile at someone, publicly you say good things. Privately, that's a whole other story, right? But listen, in the South, we're like, I'm going to be good. I want to make people think that I'm moral or I'm upright. And so you might be, listen, you could totally be, quote, a good person and follow another religion. There are criminals who accept the fact that people, or they steal stuff, are nice to their mother-in-laws and are great neighbors. They're good people. You'd be like, that's a good person. You're like, except for that thing, right? It has to be wider than that. at our motivation, there has to be something transforming and changing us so that it reaches not just simply to how I behave with other people, but what I think and do with my finances, the language that I use, so that the good news of Jesus might pervade my life. And I might say my life exists for another purpose. What's your distinction? Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship. I'd recommend it. That's just something you should read if you're a follower of Jesus in your life. He said this: the call of Jesus teaches us that our relation to the world has been built on an illusion. We cannot establish direct contact outside of ourselves except through him, Jesus. Following through his word and through our following of him. To think otherwise is to deceive ourselves. Here's what he's saying. The minute that you think that you can interact with this world apart from going through Christ as a follower of Jesus, you've bought a lie. And so these guys in the middle of a foreign country are going, hey, how in the world do we continue to be followers of the one true God with different names and different food and different customs? We have to learn to live with distinctiveness. See, that's difficult. Yeah, that is difficult, but there's more than this. It goes on. I think not only do we have to learn to live with distinctiveness, but in this next section we'll see this, that understanding that God is faithful and yet living in uncertain times means we have to learn to live with dissonance. But Daniel, verse 8, resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink, and let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this manner and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. What's going on here? Well, at some point in time, if you live in a land that is not your culture, if you live in a land that's opposite and sometimes opposed to the things that you would agree with or have conviction for, at some point in time, you are going to have to learn to live with dissonance. In other words, there's going to be something that conflicts with your core value and your life. And for Daniel, it was the food. He was okay with the language, it seems, okay with the new ideas. It seemed okay even to be all right with the new name, yet for him, he drew the line at the food. Now, why? Some people say, well, it's because it was against Jewish kosher law. At that point in time, Jewish kosher law was gone because it just got decimated. But that's how he lived, and some people say, well, maybe he wanted to uphold that. Some people say, oh, no, it's not that at all. It's that the food, the meat, was offered to idols, except when you look in Babylonian history, Babylonians offered not only meat to idols, they also offered vegetables. So it's not that. I think here's what it comes down to. When it comes down to it, this is it. I think, and some commentators think as well, this is my opinion of this, but my interpretation of it is this, that when it came down to it, what really irked Daniel was not just the law of the kosher stuff, but that it was really about who is he following and who's providing for him. Does he want to sit at the king's table? To be at the king's table meant more than just to be at the king's table. It meant to be that the king is your provider. And I think ultimately Daniel's going, no. God is my provider. The name Daniel, do you know what Daniel means? God is my judge. And I think he meant that. I think he understood that. So he's like, here's the deal. The king's going to judge me according to his standards. I want God to judge me according to his thing. I want him to be my provider. And so I have to learn, he's got to figure out how to learn to have a conviction about not eating the food and yet navigate that too. The word dissonance is a musical term. It comes from the lack of harmony. And so if you were to play notes that correspond to one another in harmony together, they would harmonize and it would sound pleasant. If you were to play notes that did not harmonize, they would be dissonant. That would hurt your ears. You go, oh, stop that. Stop doing that. And so that's a word that is often used when you have to navigate a culture in which some things are like, oh, I like that, and other things you don't. This is what Paul uses. He uses this word in Corinthians when he talks to the church. He says this. He says in 2 Corinthians 6:14, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? They can't exist in the same place. What harmony, there's that word, has Christ with Belial or evil? Or what portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? And the answer would be like, they don't match. Right? In Sesame Street's terms, one of these things is not like the other. One of these things doesn't belong. That's that. And so Daniel, it was the food, and he takes a stand on it. The story's told about a man who went to Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter is a island off the coast of the Carolinas. It is most notably known for the place in which the Civil War began, its first battles. What's interesting about Fort Sumter is that it, during the Civil War, was occupied not only by Confederate troops at times, but also by Union troops. And so a writer was on his way to that island to visit it. And on his way over, he actually wrote down this little story about him going over. And he thought about the fact that he was about to go to this fort that had been occupied by both Union and Confederate troops at different times. And he had this thought. He said, I wonder, what will the guards and the people reenacting be wearing when I get off the boat? Because he had to take a ferry. It's an island. You have to go over there. So he thought about this all the way over. Was it the Union because they the war and like, would it be Confederate? Because they were trying to say, which would it be? Back and forth, back and forth. He was astounded to have his answer given to him immediately when he pulled up. Because as soon as he pulled up, he saw right there a first person in period getup and outfit. And to his surprise, there was a soldier standing with a blue jacket and gray pants. Blue for the Union, gray for the Confederate. Hey, not going to pick a side. Here's the question. What do you and I do as followers of Jesus, if you're a follower of Jesus, when that's not afforded to us? When you can't wear a blue jacket and a gray pants? When you have to say, you know what, there's an area of my life that I can't go further in. And it's not going to make sense, and it's opposite to the culture, and I've got to learn somehow how to live knowing that my choice will not be liked by other people or approved of. How do we do that? I think there's a tension that exists in exile, in which Daniel's in, and when we live in a culture that's not yours. And it's this. It's the tension of what people call humble conviction. Notice, Daniel. But Daniel resolved that he would not eat the food and defile himself. So he threw the food back in their face and said, shove it. No, he didn't say that, right? So he wrote his congressman. Nope, didn't do that either. So he ranted online and tweeted at the king. Nope, didn't do that either. So he fought the eunuch in a fist fight. Nope. No, none of that stuff. What did he do? He asked. What? You see, here's the thing. Appealing to your rights, fighting, tweeting, throwing food back in people's face, all that stuff, you have to have some sort of power to do that. Daniel's got none. Who's watching Daniel? A eunuch. He's in the care of a eunuch. He doesn't have much power in that world. And so when you don't have power in a culture and yet you experience dissonance, Daniel goes, you know what? I'm going to exercise humble and yet conviction. This isn't just followers of Jesus who understand this. A guy named Adam Grant wrote a book In it, he's called Thinking Again. He draws this little graph and he says, listen, there's a sweet spot between conviction and knowledge. And he actually calls it this. He doesn't know the story of Daniel. He may, I don't know, but he didn't cite it in the book. And he says there's this little sweet spot, and he calls it the humility sweet spot. And what he's saying is that there are some people who have knowledge. They understand something, which, by the way, Daniel wasn't the only one. His 4 friends weren't the only one. These 4 guys weren't the only ones who were taken away. There would have been other people there who understood what it meant to sit at the king's table. And yet, they didn't say anything. Well, why not? Well, they had knowledge of it, but they're kind of like in that insecure zone of going like, I'm not going to say anything. There were other people who probably would have stood up and said, we're fighting the Babylonians. Let's get them. They were all dead, right? So they were in the arrogant conviction side. Daniel has to navigate this, and so do you and I. At some point, you have to say, listen, I am convicted enough to stand up for what I believe in, and yet I want to be humble enough to do so in a way that actually gets me somewhere. Listen, too often, the way that we stand for our faith undermines the faith on which we stand. Too often, the way that we stand for our faith, whether that be yelling at people online or getting in a fight with people who disagree with us or demanding that we take our rights or standing up, whatever that instinct is, right, in us that pushes back, cuts against the very grain of a dead king on a cross saying, forgive my enemies. This is what Peter says when he's writing to a suffering church in a world in which they have no power, in a culture in which it's not theirs. He says this. He says, beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. What's he saying? He's saying, listen, don't give in. He tells them, hey, you should keep your conduct, or you should actually abstain from the things that will attack your convictions and change your allegiance. Stay away from that. And yet, at the same time, the people who are supposed to be your enemies, the people who are dominant in the culture, hey, how about you respond to them in such a way that when God stands before everyone, and one by one they're called, they could at least recognize that you were correct, that you had treated them with kindness, compassion, and care. Right? Now, why in the world would we do this? Right? Why would we do this? Well, I think there's 2 things that happen that Daniel shows us happen. And just you need to know, if you say, I'm going to live with humble conviction in 2022, when it comes to 2 things are going to happen. Number 1, people will think you're crazy. Okay? You mean to tell me that you are going to only engage in sexual relations with somebody who's your wife or spouse or husband? That's insane. You mean to tell me that you're going to go ahead and you're going to give your money away to people rather than spending it on yourself? That's nuts. You're going to actually, instead of gaining notoriety, you're going to actually try to, lower your status to see other people get it. You're going to absorb more pain than you inflict socially, relationally. You're going to forgive that person. That's crazy. And that's what Daniel gets. He goes to the eunuch in charge and he says, listen, here's what I want to do. I want to eat the vegetables, not the food. And the eunuch goes, why in the world do I want that to happen? It's like the king's going to look at that and go, what are you doing? You want to endanger my head? That's crazy. In other words, he's going, you can't be serious. You can't be serious. Listen, you've got friends who take a look at the things that you are trying to pursue when it comes to following Jesus, and they'll go, you can't be serious. And yet, for every person who thinks you're crazy, there's an opportunity. That's the second thing. So Daniel goes to the guy under that guy. Chief eunuch, you may not have noticed that, says, no, I'm not going to do that. The steward under the chief eunuch, Daniel goes to him and he's like, here, let me give you an opportunity. And here's the opportunity, right? The opportunity is that somebody else might get to see God at work. He says, look, let our appearance, just test it. Just give it to us for 10 days. Apparently 10 days was fine. He's like, all right. And then Daniel has the audacity to say, then do with us what you want. 10 days of vegetables and water, and then you decide. That's pretty daring. He's looking at them and going, God, here is an opportunity in my humble conviction that God might show up, that someone else might just see him at work. And you know what happens because we read it. They look at him and they're like, dude, how'd you get so fat eating vegetables and water? You're like, I know how I do that. I do that, right? Like, that's what happens to me, right? No matter what I eat, that's what happens. That's not really what happens. But like they look at him and they're like, what in the world, dude? That's crazy. Now, before we jump ahead to that quote unquote victory, don't Sunday school this. He's under pressure. What do you think happens after 10 days if he eats vegetables and water and shows up looking like a wet noodle? He's dead, probably. He's out of the program, right? And there's no like secondary education program, I'm fairly certain. He's probably a eunuch, right? And he's like, I don't want to go there, right? So like he's going, hey, he's actually putting himself out there and going, God, you got to show up. There's some real pressure here. He's going to stand before the king eventually. This isn't some like cutesy, oh, by the way, just eat vegetables. It's real pressure. And I only say that because it's highly possible that you're here going, you don't understand the pressure I'm under. You don't understand my life. You don't understand my friends. You don't understand my line of work. You don't know what it's like to be with my family, to have to navigate this. You don't understand. I come from a family that doesn't have a relationship with Jesus. And I talk to them about Jesus, and they're like, why are you wasting your life? Why would you do it that way? Why do you think that way? This is very real. It's real to Daniel. It's real to you and me. So how in the world can we learn to live with this? Well, I think not only is it learning to live with distinctiveness and dissonance, but lastly, what we find is that Daniel could do this only because he lived with dependence. Verse 17. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them. And among all of them, none was found like Daniel, by the way, Hebrew names here, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. Now, in case you believe this is a story about the sustaining power of vegetables, it is not. Okay. There's some people, maybe you learned that. Maybe you're like, oh, Daniel ate vegetables, so eat your vegetables. Let's pray. Like, that's not the moral of the story here. This story is actually not so much even about the faithfulness of Daniel. Do you know what the story is about? The faithfulness of God. You've been looking at it the entire time, staring you right in the face. The king speaks with them. He finds that they're amazing. How is this possible? Well, if you go back and look, all the way in verse 2, here's what we find. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into the Babylonians' hands. Verse 9, God gave Daniel favor with the eunuch. Verse 17, God gave them learning and skill and literature and wisdom. Is this Daniel being so great? Like, dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, right? Or is this God? This is the sustaining power of God at work in the life of Daniel and his friends. Every commentator will tell you that the word vegetable here in the original language means peasant food. Now, I'm not trying to burst your bubble about any kind of Daniel fast or anything that you're doing in 2022. But this wasn't supposed to work. This is not like he ate fruits and vegetables and exercised 3 times a day. And what do you know? He was a specimen of humanity. We'd go, yeah, It's called caloric intake, right? Yeah. That's how it works. They knew that. Right? Hey, they ate peasant food and yet they look like kings. How did that happen? Well, there was a God sustaining Daniel upon which he depended. This is Daniel throwing himself at the feet of God every time he turns around. God will rescue me. God is with us. Where was God when we were brought off to exile? Daniel goes, he was with us. Where is God when I'm being fed food that I don't want to eat? He's with us. Where is God when I'm trying to live and navigate humble conviction? He is with you. Where is God when I have to stand before the king? He's with you. He's with you. It means learning to live with dependence. There's a good picture, I think, that we can kind of go one, two ways with, and it really has to do with how you deal with pressure. There's two ways that you can deal with pressure. Now, the first one looks like a diving bell or a bathysphere. That's that picture on the left. It's a giant metal structure. And what they found is that in the ocean, like in the air, in our atmosphere, the further down you go in the ocean, the greater the pressure gets. So that if you and I were just to just put on a bathing suit and jump in and start swimming all the way down, not only would you not have enough oxygen in your lungs, not only would the oxygen in your lungs dissipate to an amount which would not help you, but your body and your bones literally could not withstand the pressure. And so what we've done as people is we've got something like a diving bell in which we're like, let's get a metal container and see how far it goes before it crunches. So we did that. So then we put another layer of metal on it and we're like, how far will it go now? And then it crunches. And we keep doing that and layering and layering and layering and layering and layering until those two poor souls who are smiling at you in that picture are like, we'll get in it. Right? So they get in it and they're like, we're going to send you down because we're pretty sure that we put enough metal on the outside that it's not going to crunch you. That is one way of dealing with pressure. And for many of us heading into 2022, that is how we deal with pressure. Your plan for 2022 is going to put one more coat of metal on the outside of whatever you got going on. I'm going to go to the gym one more time. Whoop. I'm going to eat better. Whoop. I'm gonna write stuff in a journal. I'm gonna increase the thickness of the pressure because the pressure that's coming at me, whether it be my family or my friends, that's the thing, right? That's not what Daniel's doing here. This isn't Daniel going, I'm gonna slap another coat of sheet metal on me and stand up. You know what's interesting? When they sent those two little guys down there, I mean, they're not little, I don't know. They sent those guys down in the water and they got way, 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 way down deep. Do you know what we found down there in the water? Fish. Like, big surprise, right? There's fish in the ocean. Fish all the way down deep. Except they're not in a diving bell. This is a Mariana snailfish. And the reason I brought a drawing of it is because if you were to look at it in real life, it'd be grotesque. Sorry, you can go Google it. It's not great. Doesn't look good. But it lives, and it swims around. This fish survives the weight of 11,600 elephants standing on it. That's the pressure at which it lives. And it does so without a trip to the gym, without extra steel wrapped around on it, just because of how it is, swimming around. What's its secret? You know what we found? How it's made on the inside. That it was designed with a air bladder on the inside that as the pressure from the outside pushes in, there's something inside great enough to push back out on it to withstand the force that it goes through. Understand what's going on with Daniel? That's what it is for a follower of Jesus. It's not grin and bear it. I'm going to make it through. It's that God might be so powerfully at work in my life, and I might be so dependent upon Him that what is happening inside of me is strong enough that it pushes back out on anything that would be pushing in on me. That's what it means to live with dependence. Elizabeth Elliot put it this way in her quote. She said this, "He leads us right on, right through, right up to the threshold of heaven. He does not say to us ever, 'Here it is.' He says only, 'Here am I. Fear not.'" Listen, so some of you might be looking at 2022 going, "God, I want you to say, 'Here it is.' I want you to get me through. I want you to clear up some of this volatility. I need you to give me some certainty. I need less complexity. I need something simple." It'd be really helpful, God, if there wasn't something ambiguous. And there may not be. But here's what I do know. Chances are he's not just going to hand you it. He's probably going to come alongside you and go, "I'm here. I haven't moved. And I'm still faithful." And it's probably going to mean learning to live with distinction and dissonance, and most of all, dependence. Some of you are here and you're looking for a diet in 2022. You know what Daniel's diet was? It wasn't vegetables and water. It was the Word of God. And so maybe, if nothing else, out of this message, you get the fact that you need to eat and consume God's thoughts this year and depend on Him. In a world that's trying to feed you all of this stuff, that you actually find something that has nutritional, spiritual content and sit at His table, Jesus' table, as opposed to the table of this world. Some of you, maybe it's not that. Maybe some of you, you're under pressure and you're just trying to grit your teeth and push through it. And you've got this idea that you're just got to be some super Christian. You got to be like Daniel. And you're trying to stand with humble conviction. And people are calling you crazy. And there might be an opportunity, but you don't know if you can hold on. It's not by just muscling through. We'll talk about that later in this year. It's only by throwing yourself at the feet of God again and again and again, daily, saying, "God, do something in me," that you'll stand up to anything else. And lastly, maybe you're here and maybe you're like, "Man, you know what? I wish I could be Daniel, but I've already screwed that up." Maybe you're like, "I've already compromised." Forget conviction, forget humility. I look like the culture. Yeah, I just slapped Jesus on my life. That's what I do. And you're going, "Man, I wish I could be Daniel, but that's not me. What do you got for me?" The message of the Bible and the message of Jesus is there was and is someone better than Daniel. And he also was from the tribe of Judah. He also was without blemish and without spot, not just physically, but spiritually. He also left his home to go and live in a foreign land. And he lived with humility, and he lived with conviction. And he stood in your place and in mine. And he died so that you and I could stand before a king. So we could stand under the eye of God as our judge. And so that he might look at us and go, "Man, you're 10 times better than you actually really are." Why? Because of Jesus. He stood when we couldn't. He did what we can't do. He did not compromise in all the 100 areas where I compromise every day. He did that so that he might give us grace and so that we might be able to live with dependence upon that grace daily into 2022. I'm going to close like this. At the end of chapter 1, there's a little footnote. It's code. And it says this: "And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus." What does that mean? Well, years later, a king named Cyrus would come along. And you know what he did in his first year? He sent all the exiles home. Daniel was faithful. But more importantly, God was faithful to Daniel. He'll be faithful to you and to me because of Christ. Let's pray. Father, we just thank you for the year that has been. in the year that's ahead. We thank you, knowing full well that there were things that happened this last year that we did not approve of or enjoy. Things that were hard and painful and difficult. Things that we could wish we could take back. And yet through it all, you were there. Through it all, you had your son on the cross, risen from the dead, to offer us life and grace. And God, we look forward to 2022 in the same light, that whatever it may be, difficult, wealth or poverty, health or sickness, whatever that might be ahead of us, we would learn dependence on you. That we might be able to say that God has been and will be faithful. Thank you for Jesus. But help us not to forget who you are and who we are. It's in his name that we pray. Amen.